All right, perfect. Well, welcome everybody. Great to see all of you here. As you know, every 2 weeks we have a community member that is willing to and generous with their time and energy and experience to share a tool, a framework, and experience with you. And today we have a very special guest, actually. I'll let Dea introduce herself, but just to say, Dea is one of the kind of oldest with us community members. She's been around for a very, very long time. She's been through us through many different things, and she's always amazed me because she has a unique way of applying things. She has a background as an entrepreneur, but also now working in a large organization, implementing EXO there. Always very supportive and passionate to EXO and trying out different ways to add value with EXO and also a lot of her other experiences. So I am personally very excited about today's topic because I think we're going to be looking at what it actually takes to implement EXO innovation actually in a large organization and even to affect change on a very practical level. Sometimes when we look at larger organization, it's a big question mark, right? Like how to do this. So if you have a 20-person company, it's perhaps slightly easier. When you have a large company, it's like, where do you start? How do you make that happen? What are the pitfalls, etc.? So I think we'll learn a lot about that today. And without further ado, I'm just going to hand over to Dea. She will have about a 40-minute presentation and then a 50-minute Q&A afterwards. In terms of logistics, maybe if you can keep your cameras on so Dea doesn't feel like she's speaking into nowhere, that's always nice. But you can put your microphone on mute just so we keep the recording clean. You can find the recording of this about 1 day after today on learn.openexo.com, together with about 30 other masterclasses from previous community members. And by the way, if any of you want to host a masterclass yourself, you can just email certification@openexo.com. I'll put it in the chat and we can schedule you in sometime in the future. So there, that's all. We are very excited to have you here, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Yaroslav, and greetings to all of you. I'm super, super happy to see some of my black belt Open EXO friends here on the call, and also very excited to see some new faces. So let me just very quickly get to my slide deck and let's jump straight into it. So maybe starting with a little bit of an introduction. As Yaroslav said, I've been around the OpenEXO community for quite a few years, let's say from the early stage of OpenEXO. And I have before that always worked in the tech sector, mostly on the strategy, business development, growth hacking, and innovation side. I have built up 2 companies on my own, and I've been working with organizations from all over the world on EXO transformations. I will share a little bit more about that, but that's basically the background I'm coming from. And the last almost like 6-7 years now, I have primarily been focusing on transformation. And a lot of it was actually based on the EXO concept framework. And I've been working with many of the community members like Yaroslav, like Lars and Suman on this call, and kind of evolving and polishing my approach based on all the experiences that we had together. So the topic that I chose for today is tackling contradictions, because I think a lot of the topics around transformation are pretty complex. And if you think about it, transformation is really one of the hottest buzzwords of the business ecosystem today. And while it's one of the hottest buzzwords, what we see is a lot of companies are engaging in transformation, and yet very few of them are making real progress. A lot of them are struggling. Many of them are failing in their transformation efforts. And there is only a few, like a handful of companies who can really prove that they have some traction, they have a track record, and they really kind of win in the transformation game, which also means they are winners in tapping into opportunities of the future. So what I thought might be valuable for all of you to hear about is a few of the key questions that I always get from my customers when I'm working on transformation, and then few of the contradictions that I found that are fundamentally undermining any transformation efforts if they are not thoroughly thought through already upfront at the beginning of the project. So the program that I have for this 45 minutes is going through the 3 key questions. So first is, what is transformation? Because we love to use this word, but I think a lot of people who are using it, a lot of businesses who are using it and going to transformation don't really profoundly think about what it actually means. Why is it such a big buzzword? And then what's most important, and that's going to be kind of the meatier part of this conversation, what needs to be transformed when we talk about business transformation? And then what are those contradictions that can undermine success? So let's jump straight into it and start with what is transformation. And if you look at the world, I think it's very telling already. So transform is really about transcending the current form of something. So when you go through a transformation process, the outcome should be profoundly different from what you started off with. And if you look at the definition of transformation, this transcending the current form, the definition is that a thing that is transformed is going through a thorough or even dramatic change in form or appearance. And now if you bring it back to business transformation, it's very rare that we actually see that dramatic change of form. It's very rare where we see an existing business to go into a bold and ambitious process of transformation and come out of it completely renewed in terms of values that it delivers, in terms of ways how it delivers the value, and also in terms of ways how it captures the value throughout the value creation processes. So I think it's important to talk about it, because if we start the transformation processes laying down the foundations of this, that transformation actually means profound, deep, dramatic change that can already shape the mindset of people participating in it. And honestly, most of the businesses will never get there. They will never transform dramatically. But even if they just, have that moonshot of transformation and end up coming up with some meaningful changes, I think the process is already worth it. So let's move to the next question, which is about, and hopefully my slides are working, there you go, why transformation is such a big buzzword. And you are all from the EXO community, and of course, we have all been participating and delivering awake sessions, and we have all been talking so much about, how technology unlocks new opportunities, how with new scientific areas we can solve problems in more meaningful ways, how we have, for the first time in the history of humanity, the opportunity to create value in brand new ways. And I think this community is all about this, having a purpose and looking into new technologies, new scientific areas, new business models to create value. But I think there is one other aspect that we really need to deeply think about when we start transformation. And that is that along with the new opportunities, there are a lot of new emerging threats that we have to handle. And of course, again, I'm not sharing anything new, slowing global economics, geopolitical tensions, trade wars, and the rest. These are experiences that we all have and that all of our businesses are kind of suffering from. I think what I would like to highlight here is that these events used to be like once or twice or three times in a lifetime events for our businesses. Now they are like everyday events for our businesses. So if I just look at this list, let's say geopolitical tensions. I'm coming from Hungary originally. Right now I live in the Philippines. So I moved here 1.5, 2 years ago. And before I moved out, back in Hungary, I was spending the last year that I lived there working on my business daytime, and then evenings and mornings working with a group of volunteers, helping Ukrainian refugees to flee from war, pick them up at the border of Hungary, bring them back to Budapest, help them figure out how to, set foot and find a way into their new lives. Now, I moved to the Philippines, fast forward 2 years, and actually tomorrow I will start my day going to an event where we will be discussing with some decision makers about the geopolitical tensions around the Philippines, China, Taiwan tension, which we probably read about. What many people don't know is that in the Philippines, it's an everyday event now that Chinese military ships are actually committing or attacking fishermen and Philippine Coast Guards on Philippine waters. So it's like an everyday event that businesses really need to look into. Or if I look at supply chain disruptions, just on Saturday, I went out with a friend who is importing goods from Europe, and she was just sharing with me what a financial loss she's suffering because She's shipping from Europe, and instead of 3 weeks sailing through the Red Sea, now ships have to go around Africa. And, there's like a very apparent negative impact on business. So events that used to be once or twice or 3 times in a lifetime are now, this is my last week, right? So it's not like we're talking about last year or so. This is only last week, and new things will come up tomorrow. So this is very telling that these are strong signals. These are like our everyday life. And to me, the conclusion from this is that we are living in systems that were not designed to last. And I think this is a very important statement when we think about transformation. What is it that we should profoundly and dramatically change? We should really profoundly and dramatically change the view about what kind of systems do we want to operate in, and what kind of systems we need to create for our businesses to be able to thrive. And so why is that contradiction there? Why is it that we are living in systems that are not designed to last? Because we have designed those systems for unlimited, infinite expansion. And there is no such thing as unlimited and infinite expansion. There is no such thing as forever exponential. And that might sound a little bit provocative in an exponential EXO community, but I think we have to really deeply think about how do we define exponential? What needs to be exponential? Positive impact that we make in the world, definitely. Using resources as if they were infinite, maybe not. And I don't give you answers. I mean, there can be many different answers to this question, but I think it's important to know that we have to think about our systems differently. So with that kind of mindset, let's move into the next topic. What needs to be transformed and how these systems need to be reconsidered. So I have created a sort of roadmap for the clients I'm working with on transformation, where I try to capture all the elements of transformation that we need to take care of when we really want to transform an organization. And of course, not surprisingly, it's on the angle of edge and core transformation. So moving from the business as usual, business model as it is, kind of operations of the organization, moving out to reimagining it and redesigning it for transformed future purposes. So let me walk you through this and how we are applying it with organizations, and particularly with large organizations who are very, very complex. But again, I have quite some background in working with mid-corp and working with startups in all sorts of different industries. So I kind of feel like this is a model where each size and each type of organization can find some areas where they can step in and start transforming and start changing their business. So let's look at the value creation part of this model first. So all the bubbles that are near the edge of this model are really focusing on transforming what is the value that the organization is creating. And it has a lot to do about futures thinking, adapting and adjusting to the external environment, and really reimagining for the organization, reimagining the organization for the future, for the changing parameters within which we need to be successful in the future. And the first component of this is pretty much the fundamentals of foresight research and for futures thinking. Which is starting with horizon scanning, environmental scanning, and scenario planning. This is basically an exercise where you look out for weak signals that if they strengthen, they can have a very deep impact on your organization. And then selecting and prioritizing those signals of change, you calculate different scenarios that you may want to look at as part of your transformation of your business. So I was talking to you about the geopolitical topic that I am, for example, focusing on amongst many others here in the Philippines. So we have this tension, and it's very apparent that there is more and more pressure on the South China Sea region. And it's also very apparent that it might have effect and impact on Philippine businesses on the short run. So what we were looking into with the teams I am working with over the last 1.5 years is what can we do about supply chain security? Because Philippines is 90% import dependent. So if South China Sea is under blockade, the country will have a major challenge. And of course, businesses will have a major challenge here. What can we do about food security? Because of course, a lot of the food items are also import dependent. What can we do about physical security? What can we do about protecting physical infrastructure? And one of the largest conglomerates here in the Philippines I am working with is basically in the food industry and energy sector, and in a lot of the sectors that would be impacted by a challenge like this. And so the next step that we did after identifying, where are the weak and strong signals that we need to focus on, was to start our futures thinking program. So really trying to identify solutions with which we can successfully tackle and provide value in those problem areas that we have identified. And basically, this is the space of the EXO programs, EXO sprints, and we ran a lot of them, like a whole series of EXO sprints to actually come up with solutions. And Suman is on the call here. He was part of the coach team who were working on it. And a lot of our initiatives were focusing on some of the areas that I was mentioning. Food security, for example, was one of them. So just to show you a few ideas and pilots that we run with the project, with the teams. So the first picture is when we were flying out to one of the power plants that our client has here in the Philippines. We were working on a project where we kind of piloted building controlled environmental farms with the kind of circular mindset, where we leveraged the waste assets of power plants. So waste assets in case of a controlled environmental farm can be CO2. So capturing the CO2 from a power plant and then feeding it into the plants is one way to kind of leverage whatever already exists within the business. Capturing the heat of the wastewater from the power plant is the other one, to regulate the heat of the farm, and then capture the water itself for certain purposes as the third one. So we have done some interesting experiments and processes to figure out how we can move into that food security space, leveraging already what exists and creating a winning business model, of course, because that's the essential of being able to pull off a new business. The second picture that you see here is another team who was working on a cold chain infrastructure, again, food security, building out the solar-powered cold chain infrastructure, which is a non-existent thing in the Philippines. 40% of the produce that is created here by farmers goes to waste before making it to the shop, simply because they don't have the infrastructure to cool it right at the farm gate. And so we have identified a cheap and easy solution that can utilize solar power to provide long-term cooling solutions right at the farms. And then there were some other interesting experiments, for example, capturing the CO2 of the power plants, feeding it into bacteria. It's a synthetic biology solution, and resulting in high quality protein that can be used as animal feed. We have piloted it and the pilot worked out well. We have also experimented with offshore fish farming, which is about taking the fish farm out to open sea, which means you can grow fish on a much higher quality using less antibiotics, being less disruptive to the ecosystem, creating a thriving ecosystem out there, and also generate financial premium, of course, because it's high quality produce. Product. We were looking at barramundi in particular. And the last one that you see there is energy kind of security. The picture is from the Manila River. I don't know if you know it, but the Philippines, unfortunately, is one of the biggest plastic polluters in the world. And a lot of that plastic is actually landing in the ocean. So we came up with a technology and business model which helps us to capture the plastic that is flowing through the Manila River right into the oceans. And instead of letting that happen, collect all the waste, put it through an AI and the machine vision separated waste segregation line. And then once you have the segregated waste, there are a lot of plants like cement plants, pyrolysis plants, who need segregated waste because they need plastic and other substances to heat up their facilities. And so you can sell it off and you have a business model out of it. So we ran a ton of experiments. Again, it all starts with sensing what are the signals of change and where will be the business opportunities of the future, where are the threats of the future, and then building all sorts of experiments around it. But it all sounds nice, right? But who is going to get you from idea to scale? Because I think one of the biggest challenges of these type of transformative value creation projects is that the funding from problem exploration, idea generation, piloting, venture building, to actually scaling and making profits, there is usually a bit of a time lag, and someone has to come in and give the money there. And so I think the biggest challenge is that most of the transformation processes don't go as far as to really make it part of the strategy. So that's why strategy is the next one on my kind of value creation part of the chart, because unless these questions are discussed already early stage and upfront and are on the forefront of the thinking of every decision maker, this is the moment where transformation processes die. So how do you make it part of your strategy? Well, if you think about your strategy, usually it's from the core, from the bottom up. This is what we used to do. What are we going to continue in the next 3 years? How we are going to tweak it? It's usually very incremental. But if you have that kind of futures thinking, you do the environmental scanning, the horizon scanning, you do the futures thinking exercises, you run your own EXO workshops, sprints, whatever you choose, do your own hackathons. There are a million ways to go about thinking about solutions in the future, then you really have some good material to work with when you start strategizing. So the first question in these strategic conversations, I believe, is where to focus and where not to focus. I mean, only these few ideas that I was mentioning, these were just, I think, 3 or 4 of the, 25 ideas that we came up with. And actually, we also had like 15 ideas that we put through the initial phase of venture building, and 5 of them are now in the build and scale phase. Of course, you cannot do all of it, and you have a business as usual business to run as well. So you have to be, as a decision maker, very clear about where you place your bets. And how many bold bets are you willing to take? How many more conservative bets are you willing to take? So it's really a portfolio thinking. And it's also very important, and this is where leadership teams often fail, is to determine, because when you decide where you focus, you do one more thing. In the same time, you also decide where not to focus. And I think that's quite an important decision to make as well, particularly when we are talking about risks and capital expenses and so on. Then the other thing is how much you want to focus on the core and how much you want to focus on the edge. And I see that as one of the fundamental challenges of decision makers, because everyone is super excited when we talk about transformation. It's super exciting to think about food security for a food company, very exciting to think about energy security for an energy company. But when it comes to the numbers game, when it comes to strategy, suddenly it's just so much easier to stay on the core. It's just so much easier to stay in the comfort zone. And I will never forget one conversation I had. It was one of my clients. I've been working for 10, 15 years with them, one of the biggest, most prestigious car manufacturers in the world. And I was speaking to the factory CEOs. I had a good relationship with him. And we came up with these all amazing transformation ideas that we could do. And he loved it. And he kept, going. But then eventually I started challenging him, like, hey, we've been working for so many years, but you really didn't deliver much, right? And so what he said was, you know what? We really love all the things that you bring us and you inspire us, and it's all cool. But honestly, our bonus really depends on what decisions we make. And as soon as our private jets depend on it, the fancy university for our kids depend on it, we are not going to take the risk of bold bets. So as soon as we get to the decision-making point, these leaders go back to the core and say, this is the business that I know. I'm not willing to take any risks. So unless you very mindfully make it part of their decision-making process, that let's say X% of their strategy should really focus on the on the edge, and maybe it's just 10%, maybe it's just 5%, but unless it's really mindfully part of the thing, transformation is not going to happen. So the same for the time frame. I think short-termism is really the biggest enemy of humanity, and yet all our business ecosystems and systems are built on short-term objectives. What is going to be a profit at the end of this year? What's going to be a profit at the end of the 3-year cycle? And what's my bonus that I can bring home again at the end of the year? This is the core drive. And I know it sounds very kind of negative or pessimistic, but that's reality. We are human, and that's what I see in most of the organizations I'm working with. Purpose is nice, everyone is excited about it, but unfortunately the end of year bonus will always override it. So unless you very mindfully build that portfolio of short-term versus mid-term versus long-term bets, transformation is not going to happen. And in fact, it's not just good for the purpose, and it's not just good for the benefit of your business ecosystem. It is actually, and there are so many ways to prove that it has a long-term financial surplus if you are willing to sacrifice today for a longer term goal, as well as just the end of year bonus or profit. Timing is key. So when to move into a new space, I think is very, very important. And that's where probably the big risk lies, because it's very, very hard to estimate. So just to give you one tangible example, this project that I was mentioning about the alternative proteins, the CO2 turned into animal feed proteins with the synthetic biology. We have ran the lab scale experiment, and then we were at the doorway of investing into a larger scale plant in the Philippines, but then eventually we pulled out. Why? Because the technology is very early stage. We haven't seen any example on large scale yet. We could have put our foot in the door and probably also buy ourselves into this market with quite a big chunk and quite a big market share and the promise of quite a good overhead, but the risk is huge because we really don't know if it will play out. So basically the strategy that we came up with was, let's wait for 5 years. Let's wait for the technology to mature. It will be more expensive to step in if it takes off. We will probably have a smaller market share, but our risks are going to reduce significantly. So it was time well spent. The time was not right. We will go back to and see what we can do about it in 5 years. How to move in, of course, that's another one. And it's a big one, actually. So do we have the capabilities? Do we have the resources? Do we buy, build, borrow? Where do we need to partner? And I think that's where also a lot of the transformation efforts bleed out, because companies always want to just do it themselves. Ecosystem thinking and, whatever we do here in the Open EXO community, partnering, building things together, building value, bringing value to each other is not the commons at the moment in most of the large org space, but I really feel like in terms of transformation, if we really want to dramatically do things differently, leveraging whatever exists out there already is a huge one. And then, of course, examining what are the boundary conditions amongst which we need to be successful. So that's the value creation part of the roadmap. And then synergies, I think this is something I've just explained a little bit, like really look at what is already out there in the ecosystem, which you try to tackle, what is lacking, what exists, what are the key drivers, what are the bottlenecks, what can you leverage? And it really helps, because often, figuring out the business model is not an easy thing. And that's, again, one of the bottlenecks that companies are suffering from. For example, for the alternative proteins, at the moment, soybean meal is just so much more cheaper to feed the fish than alternative proteins. So what can we do about it? And how can we bring the price point to the right place? And that won't happen unless we really think in partnerships in the ecosystem and leveraging whatever is available already on the market. So that's the edge of the transformation roadmap. And then there is the core of it, of course, which is the value delivery part. So once we kind of have the strategy, we have the kind of future bets and the current bets, how we want to build our business further. Of course, there are these 3 core transformation areas, people, processes, and technologies that we need to focus on. A lot of the companies don't go as far as to changing the value creation, but I think this is for all the companies. Every company can and have to think about how to change the way we deliver value. And of course, the people part is the mindset, the culture, the drive, the purpose, and the people side. The processes are right now all about automation, simplification, using AI. And maybe just to give you also one example from the core. So one big experiment that we are running, again, organization of 40,000 people. So it's a huge organization. And so what we do is we are running a Gen AI experiment with people. So they can sign up for advanced Gen AI tools. So Gemini subscriptions, ChatGPT, 4 and beyond subscriptions. We give them tools, we give them capabilities, and we give them kind of challenges, week by week tasks that they have to do and experiment very proactively with the tools. And so what happens is we have decentralized kind of future-proofing the processes of the organization, because instead of us trying to figure out what will be the most efficient way to rethink our processes, now everyone, with the help of all the advanced tech tools that we are giving them, experiment on their own. And every week we are just getting so much progress. And there is a huge exponential traction in transforming the organization in a decentralized fashion, getting people participate in these challenges week by week with us. And it's really rewarding to see, like, our colleagues are coming up with AI products every day, which then they roll out in the organization, which then many of the other colleagues benefit from. And of course, in these big organizations, and I think in every organization, there are always the early adopters, the late majority, and then, of course, the laggards as well. So it's not everyone who is enrolling, but what we have learned is as soon as you have at least 20% of the organization participating, that will take your organization to the tipping point, and then a completely new dynamics will kick in, because 20% is a critical mass that can already pull the rest of the organization with it. So and then of course the last point is how you utilize technology, which again has two focus in the practice that I do. One is, you know, how you can use technology to be more efficient in your value delivery, but of course there's the other one, how you can utilize technology to be more efficient in your value creation, like the technologies that we were talking about before. So that's the kind of edge core transformation angle that we are tackling. And I know that, you know, these components are all new to you, or I believe so. But why am I sharing this with you? Is because what I find is most of the leaders actually struggle to understand what transformation is. And unless you give them such a specific explanation of how you go from futures thinking to future-proofing your current core business, it's just going to be a mess. And, you know, if you read about transformation and how to do it, the first thing that you can always read in this, like, top 3 things how to transform a business is get the stakeholders on board. And everyone is talking about it as if this was the simplest thing to do ever. But in reality, unless there is a shared understanding, and this map really works to me to get that shared understanding with stakeholders, there will always be pushbacks, and it will just not happen. So, or maybe just one more point, the value capture at the bottom of the page. So that's the business model part. So that's how you actually make money out of all the things that that I was sharing about. So after the 3 questions, so we went through what is transformation, why is it such a hot topic right now, and then what needs to be transformed if you look at an existing organization from edge to core. Now let's go into that subject of contradictions very quickly. And I want to share 3 contradictions with you. One is more on a large scale systemic level. The second one is more on an organizational level. And the third one is on an individual level. And honestly, I think the biggest contradiction is the individual level ourselves. So unless we can transform the way we perceive and do things and think about things, unless we can overcome our convictions and fears and, you know, our greed and like so many human things that we have, I think we are not going to be successful in transformation. So what is blocking us and what to do about it? So the first one that is, I think, very, very important, that in the last, let's say, 100, 150 years, we have built a specialized world around us. And the reason for that is that in the 20th century and beyond, the way to solve problems was really through science. We needed to understand how the world works, but taking the world being so complex, we needed to take that complexity, tear it apart, like take it to small, small pieces, and then examine the small piece and understand the simpler kind of component, the small piece, to get better grasp on how the world works. And it's actually very helpful. We have solved a lot of problems with this approach, but as if you remember, why do we have those once in a lifetime threats now every day in our lives? Eventually, focusing only on the pieces of the system will not work out if you're not looking at the interconnected nature of our reality. So I think one of the key messages of systems thinking, and we cannot, and it's kind of like a funny slide, it's like I've just quickly jotted it down for you so that I can show what I mean here, is that every subsystem in a system is interconnected and part of the wider whole. And when you look at the system, you can remove a subsystem and examine it on its own, but it will lose a lot of important properties. So you won't be able to understand the big whole unless you look at also those properties that the subsystem has when it interacts with other subsystems and it interacts with its environment. And I think a lot of the examples that I've been bringing to you really comes to and speaks to this point. I have just recently read a really fascinating book from Ed Conway called The Material World. And I can tell you the reason why I was just so intrigued to read this is that we are living in this like hyper digital world, and we are talking about exponential technologies, and our whole life is as if, you know, the physical reality wouldn't even exist. But it's very fascinating to actually step out of that digital mindset and go back and see what are the fundamentals of this digital world. For example, some of the key raw materials, and these are the raw materials that the book goes through and explains in more detail. For example, what kind of sand do we need, and what's the process we need to have the fiber optic cables that will bring us the internet, and how scarce that resource actually is, and how difficult the technology is, and how many countries and how few suppliers are there, and we don't even know how dependent we are on just a few players out there. So really expanding our systemic understanding, what do we need as an underlying process, principle, raw material, or anything like that, to be able to enjoy, you know, the metaverse conversation, the blockchain conversations, the digital AI conversations. It's really mind-boggling and fascinating. And once you go into that space, you won't be able to think about your business transformation the same way anymore, because there's a color to it which will force you to think more holistically. And here is a quote from Martin Luther King, which I really, really love. And I'm also very impressed that this talk is from 1967, and it really says the principles of systemic thinking, where he says, did you ever stop to think that you can't leave for your job in the morning without being dependent upon most of the world? Before you finish eating breakfast in the morning, you've depended on more than half of the world. This is the way our universe is structured. Its interrelated quality. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And this quote really leads us to the first kind of tool and mental model that a few of you know and many of you use also. We are using this in our EXO sprints, which is the futures will and the second order thinking. And it really goes to the quote from Martin Luther King that everything is interrelated. And when we are making decisions, or when we are examining a trend or event or change phenomena, we really have to go and think hard and deep how many different effects that decision or that change will have. So the futures wheel is a tool where you can put your decision in the middle of the wheel, or you can put the change phenomena in the middle of the wheel, and then really map out in your mind map what are the first order consequences of that decision or that change, what are the second order consequences, what are the third order consequences, and what are the relations between that. So this is called second order thinking. It's fascinating how it expands your thinking about transformation and what is the right or potentially wrong decision, or what would be the optimal decision. Let's rather put it this way, because you might not know what's right or wrong at this point of time. But if you look at these future wheel exercises and compare it to reality, what we find is often the decisions that are winner decisions on the first order, so the short-term consequence is something positive. If you keep digging and you look at the second or third order, it turns out that on the midterm or the long term, they are actually going to backfire. So it's a very, very interesting tool to move from this hyper-specialized perspective to a more of a systemic perspective. And I'm looking at my timer and I see that we're kind of running out of time. So I would just very, very quickly go through this. Maybe a few of you are interacting with systems thinking. And if you look at the systems thinking toolset, it's really all about taking the parts and putting it together into a system. Look at connections, look at circularities, look at emergence, synthesis, relationships, and don't only just look at the specialized view, but also look at the connectivities. Now, this is like the big system, a contradiction that is quite a bottleneck, but then there is also the organizational bottleneck, which is short-term profits versus long-term sustainability. I think this is the biggest one, honestly, that is blocking organizations from really profoundly transforming. So let me share some inspiration with you. I get a lot from Kate Rover's Donut Economy, where she explains how, again, this infinite expansion model is just utterly wrong. It's not possible. And if you, in your business planning, take two parameters into consideration, and I'm tremendously simplifying it right now for the sake of time, and also I don't think I need to go into this deeper. So if we go beneath our social foundations, humanity will suffer. If you create systems where basic needs are not met, people will suffer. And if you think about the organization, salaries, compensations, well-being, and so on. But also, if you go beyond the ecological ceiling, the entire ecosystem will suffer. So you have to find with your business model that space between the two where your business can thrive. But that's not a model for unlimited expansion. That's a model for thriving in balance. So that's a big change of mindset. And just a quick personal story, and it goes to the first mental model that I want to share with you, that is the perceived cost versus real cost. When I was a child, I come from this like super innovative family. My father was a top engineer and also very, very sensitive artist and painter. And my mother also like super nature's child. So we were really kind of brought up in a very kind of holistic, mindful setting. And when I was 13, my father started nudging me that every time I left my room, I kept the lights on. And he kept going like, turn off the lights, turn off the lights. Whenever you're not in your room, turn off the lights. And he really annoyed me. So I decided to be smart. And I made a calculation to show how much money he can save by nudging me if I turn off the lights every time I leave the room compared to not doing it. And it was a very small number, like $50 a year or something like that. So I went to him and I said, look, Dad, you are really destroying our relationship for $50 a year. Why don't you just get off my back and let me be, you know, I don't care about your lights. And I will never, ever forget that conversation, because what he said was, super smart, well done. I mean, he really acknowledged my effort. And then he said, so how about I take you to the next level? Have you ever thought about where that energy comes from? Have you ever thought about what we burn for you to be able to leave your lights on when you're not even using it? And have you ever thought about how much of those resources the earth has that you are just wasting right now? And I will never forget how ashamed I felt. Not because he was shaming me, he was really just having a father's-daughter's relationship, but really I felt so silly and and really so shallow, coming with my profit-oriented approach, when he was giving me like this whole wide view of, seriously, that's the cost you are perceiving, but the real cost is tremendously so much higher. So so I think this is the type of thinking that is possible to now bring into the business transformation discussions, because all those decision makers feel also that, for example, extreme weather events are now more common, and that we are really reaching the tipping point of our ecosystem. And that leads us to our individual contradiction, which I think is probably the most important one that we need to tackle, because we are these kind of really weird beings on Earth, that instant gratification is just beyond everything else. We cannot think in legacy, and that's how we are biologically wired. So there's a lot of behavior science research going about it, how our brains and us as human beings, we are just not able to empathize with our future self. I cannot empathize with myself when I will be 80. I don't think today whether I should have that ice cream or not to avoid diabetes in 20 years, because I don't care, because it's so far out. I cannot empathize with it. I just want instant gratification. I want that ice cream. And we do the same in business if you think about it. I want the end of year bonus. I just want to enjoy the expensive holiday. I don't think about what's the legacy that I will leave with my decision to the ones that are coming after me. And again, a big lesson that I have learned from one of the clients I've been working with back in Europe. It's a carbon trading company. And the guy was really trying to figure out how not to just focus on trading carbon and just basically creating a zero-sum game, but not lowering the carbon amounts, but really influence decision makers to try to actually push their carbon emissions lower. And actually he came up with this kind of transparent point of view, which was every time they finished the meeting with the customer, he was asking one question from the decision maker: would your kids be proud of you when you made that decision? So he took the decision maker, who is a business transformation, whatever person, super powerful, and suddenly turned him into a father, or turned her into a mother. And the conversation completely changed. And so this way, a lot of those business decisions actually started going in the right direction. And the mental model that you can use here is regret minimization framework. Just imagine yourself when you are 80 and really think about, what do you need not to regret making the decisions that you were making in your life. And so that can kind of reframe and change the whole mindset that you have as a decision maker. And now I should go back to my map of all the topics that I've been talking about. I ran a little bit long, sorry, but I think we still have a few minutes for questions if you have any questions.
We do. Thank you very much. That was excellent there. Really, really well done. And I love to see your framework for transformation. I think it's very powerful. It's coming almost like it was like a transformation ladder. Maybe just first question from me, and then I can hand over to the rest. It's kind of an observation, actually. Lars, he had to go, unfortunately, but he kind of mentioned early on in the chat that, the word transformation, it's so often used, just to like describe a cost-cutting exercise or like a reorganization that actually doesn't do anything that you described, unfortunately. It just moves people around and saves, 10% of costs. And that's called transformation. So I think it's very important, that you start your presentation by actually defining it for people and kind of really outlining like this is what it could be, right? And these are all the different elements. And I loved kind of almost for organization actually. I don't know if you meant it as a sequence, but it can almost follow these steps, like start looking outside and then explore some possibilities and then decide which one to prioritize and then scale and then embed it inside the company. So I don't know if you meant it as a process, but to me it was almost like a ladder you're climbing and, to fully actually embed things, because I think often transformation is just like something you do a little bit on the side and then it actually doesn't live anywhere in the organization. And, it just kind of like fizzles out. But I love the thoroughness of your, I could really imagine if I was a big organization, how I can go through these steps and how I can really like embed some new value within the core of my business. So I think it's a very powerful framework. So maybe let's turn it to any questions from the audience. Any questions you have for Dea? We have about 10 minutes. left for your questions. You can raise your hand or you can just ask it in the chat. Kanoa, you can go first, and I think Suman has a question as well. So Kanoa, over to you.
Good morning. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your presentation this morning. And I've realized this onto the resistance to the transformation when you're talking about the decision makers falling back to what's comfortable or what's I guess comfortable for them. I'm experiencing that not only through the big businesses, but all through the small businesses too. Everybody or a lot of people are falling back to what's comfortable. But I do see the rate of change not slowing down though. And my question to you is regarding the decision that you guys were making regarding the proteins, the animal proteins, and stepping back for 5 years. What makes you think that the entry point will be there in 5 years and that that opportunity will still be there? Isn't it a bigger risk not to take that risk now than to assume that it's going to be there and that our social agreements and societal agreements are all going to still be there in 5 years from now? Thank you very much.
Very, very, very good question. And I think that's the kind of heavy lifting in the decision making for leaders, because so what makes me think that the opportunity will be there? The startup that we were working together with was just going into the second funding round, and they are really working now on taking their lab scale solution to a large scale solution to be able to actually build larger scale plants. And they are not the only one working on this around the world. And there are investors who are willing to commit. So it is happening. Now, the next question, and it's a super valid point, are we missing out on a huge opportunity? And so here comes the strategic thinking. So what we did, we looked at the investment portfolio that the company has, and we looked at the challenges and the priority areas that the company needs to look into. And so looking at the whole, the decision was that there are other priorities that are more in need and where we need to focus more at the moment. So even if we won't be able to step into the game anymore as a real significant player, and we will just be a buyer of this product in the future, we should rather focus somewhere else at the moment. So zooming out, looking at the entire portfolio, that was the reasonable decision to make at this point. But luckily, there are other players for whom it is a priority, and actually the process continues. So it's not that it's over, it's just that we decided not to be part of it at the early stage, but maybe come back to it later. But this is a very tough question, actually. And actually, that's where the risk comes in. And again, there are, I think investors and businesses are also, there are the early adopters and there are the late majorities. So there are a few crazy ones who would go in and, you know, risk and fund promising ideas. And there are many, many, many who are just waiting for the first proofs of concept and first good examples and then move in. And even geographically, there are differences. So for example, Southeast Asia is typically a follower region, not so much of an initiator region, because there's so much they have to fund, basic infrastructure is missing, and there's so much work to be done. They really don't have too much money to risk. They have to build up the fundamentals, which let's say Europe, US already would have.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Excellent. Suman, do you want to ask your question live? You had a great question in the chat. If you can hear us, Suman.
Yeah, I was talking about the role of the change program. Essentially, I mean, you had a great tipping point with folks coming in, you know, with their AI stuff that you talked about. So just wanted to check what really made that tipping point happen and what kind of change program you put in place to get that outcome.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. What I have learned is that people are generally hungry to participate. They just don't know how. Again, most of the people are followers, very few of them are leaders. So what we have done is we gave very easy entry points for everyone. This is where you can join us. This is the tools that you can get. Very, very simple upskilling. This is how you can use the tools. And then very concrete steps, like this is what you need to do week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. So we made it very easy to join, and we gave examples, like we gave very simple examples how to do it. And that pushed people. The appetite was there, the hunger is there. Everyone felt the need to join the game, but nothing happened for a long time because they didn't know how, and so we just created the right environment and the right context. And it just reminded me of the program, the course certification program that we used to run with Yaroslav for a long time together. And participants always came week by week, already on Monday, show me what the end result should look like at the end of this week. Everyone was always asking for examples, show me what other teams were doing, give me an example, help me imagine what good looks like. And I think in this case, that was one of the secret sauce, that we really helped them imagine what good looks like. And then they started thriving, and then they started teaching us actually what else can be done, because of course, then they came up with their own stories and their own products. And then we realized there's so much more that we couldn't have thought of. So showing some examples and giving the opportunity to follow the early adopters and the creative innovators is a very kind of helpful thing, and that will start things rolling.
Excellent. All right, Anna, over to you for your question.
Thank you. In some sense, she already answered, but I would like to focus on companies that are traded companies, you know, that how at the end of the day, what matters for them is the share price. So how you deal with this and how to encourage them to move from delivering value to creating value, to even imagine those things. Thank you.
That's also not an easy nut to crack. And honestly, this conglomerate that I am primarily working with right now in the Philippines is also a traded company, and I do get that from the top family. It's a family-owned business, but a huge one, like really, really big. And you know, one of them, I just had a conversation with a few months back, and he was like, you know what? We are talking about this transformation, but shareholders are clearly not buying it. Our share prices are not changing. So of course it takes a bit of education, but honestly, having a purpose-driven operation and showing the image on the market that you are on top of the game, not only today, but you're also on top of the game of what could potentially be there tomorrow and after tomorrow, is quite a convincing message. And I've been dealing with this company for 2 years now, and I'm confident that it will eventually show in the share prices as well. So our timeline is still, I told them I cannot promise end of next year it's going to already show, but I kind of feel like the market is already picking up. And now when the media has questions about technologies and AI, they actually do come to us and ask and showcase our projects, because they already see that there is something exciting happening in this organization. So, but yes, it's a tough one. And of course, I agree with Yaroslav. Often transformation is just a word used or abused for actually cost cutting. And of course, with the share prices, it always comes to, you know, at the end of the year, we have to report and how do we optimize on the expense side. So that's always there, and that's always that is always there, and that is always an area which you have to manage. But I think stakeholder management is really a big part of the transformation as well, to make sure people are on track. And also, I mean, we have to be honest about the reality. This is how business works. This is how humans work. So how can we influence it in the best possible way, and also accept whatever cannot be changed, and we'll roll with it and we'll figure something out.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
That's a great question. It also makes me think, I mean, with my limited understanding, but it maybe also depends a little bit who the shareholders are, because, you know, for example, a lot of the Elon Musk's companies, I mean, they have huge promises and huge valuations because of the future promises, right? But he probably has shareholders that are willing to give him the benefit of the doubt and are actually more like appreciating and valuing the future potential rather than the current performance. Maybe if you have more conservative shareholders, you know, that is kind of harder. I work also with a few organizations, and, you know, one big oil and gas company, and they have kind of almost like a, you know, fight between the shareholders, because some of them want them to go faster and, you know, go towards kind of the greener future and transformation, and the other shareholders are pulling them back, and you know, they are more focused on the short term. So even like some of the dilemmas there that you described that exist in an organization, they also exist among the shareholders. They also exist among the public, right? So it's not that, you know, everybody's clear. It's just that the organization is stubborn. It's just kind of these contradictions, you know, resist in all kind of different places. And I guess because I also work with leaders, I guess what I'm seeing a lot is that ability to handle paradoxes is very important, because there is not like a clean cut, straight answer that this is the right one, this is the bad one. It's much more kind of like a trade-off and a paradox that you need to stand within and almost like try to see a deeper solution that emerges that somehow transcends the paradox, right? And that's not an easy thing to do, but if you can do that, I think you have a very winning proposition. So those are some very interesting topics. Thank you, Anna, for the question. All right.
Sometimes because sorry.
No, go for it, please.
No, sometimes I think it's easier for him because his company started with this purpose, you know, the people who are invested in him, in his companies, they're willing to do that. But on the other hand, those companies that needs to do this transformation, I started in a very conservative and I was doing this and this, and now I have to think about the future, and sometimes it's not in the same page, you know, those publics.
Yeah, that is a good point. Excellent. All right. Well, I'm conscious of time. This was awesome, Dea. Thank you very much. You'll be able to find the recording in the Learning Hub, learn.openexo.com. Also, Dea, if people want to get in touch, have any follow-up questions, maybe if you can, well, you can put your contact details so they can find you on the platform. But I have a feeling this is something new emerging for you there as well. So it's really exciting to see that you have put all of your experiences, because you know it seems like a framework and many people can create frameworks, but what I think is unique about what you've done is that you have lived this for 10 years, both as a consultant and now actually implementing it. So that I think makes it that much more valuable. So I'm really curious what is going to go next, and definitely on behalf of all of us, wish you lots of success with this. So thank you, Dea. Thank you everybody for coming, and we have these every 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks, we have something else exciting planned for you. So thank you everybody. Have a great rest of your day, and Dea, good night.
Bye. Have
Thank
a
you
great day.
so much. Thank you very much,
Take care,
Yaroslav.
everyone.
Good to see you all. Thanks for
Bye.
joining.
Right.
Bye. Have a great day.
Bye.
A great one.